Have you ever stopped to think that there's a spiritual battle happening right above us, invisible to human eyes, but real enough to affect every decision, every challenge, and every victory we experience? What Michael faced against Lucifer over the body of Moses isn't just an ancient story or some distant myth. It's a concrete and powerful display of divine authority, ultimate courage, and spiritual protection. And what you're about to discover might shake everything you thought you understood about the universe and the true power of evil. A lot of people dismiss these events. They think they're just legends, exaggerations from ancient texts, or harmless metaphors. But the truth is that when faith is paired with obedience, it releases a force no darkness can overcome. Imagine knowing that while you're dealing with everyday problems, invisible forces are at work, guarding what's sacred. Every daily struggle is actually part of a much bigger war, and you can learn to walk safely through this spiritual battlefield. And that's where the impact hits. Michael, the archangel of divine authority, didn't face Lucifer with rage or chaos, but with surgical precision and undeniable power, standing firm for what God had established. What happened with Moses isn't just symbolic, it's a living, relevant lesson. It shows that God's protection is real, tangible, and available to anyone who submits to His will. Understanding this can radically change the way we face crises, make decisions, and even handle relationships, strengthening our faith and our inner resilience. And here's the most fascinating part. This story isn't far from your reality. Every principle revealed in it, humility, surrender, trust, and faith, can be put into practice right now to protect your dreams, your family, and your purpose. With every step you take, every decision you make, there's a real chance to connect with this extraordinary power. Just like Michael, you can experience the same authority that overcomes evil. Get ready. What you're about to learn might surprise you, inspire you, and open your eyes to a spiritual path that few walk, and even fewer truly understand. The death of Moses, Israel's great leader, didn't mark the end of his journey, as many might think. In fact, that was precisely when the real battle began. When he climbed Mount Nebo to look out over the Promised Land, he already knew his time was coming to an end. What few realize, though, is that the Bible hints at something far deeper. After his death, a cosmic battle unfolded between the forces of heaven and the powers of darkness. A hidden conflict, one that carried enormous spiritual weight for the fate of Israel and for the world itself. While Scripture offers few details about what happened after Moses died, it gives us one powerful clue. Michael, the archangel, was sent on a sacred mission to protect his body. That alone tells us Moses wasn't buried like just any man. His body and soul became the center of a fierce dispute between powers far beyond human understanding, an invisible war, but one that profoundly shaped the future of God's people. But why would Moses' body matter so much? He had already fulfilled his mission and passed into eternal rest. The answer lies in the spiritual realities that govern existence. Lucifer, bitter over his fall and loss of authority, wanted to claim Moses' body as a symbol of triumph over God's plans. His goal was to stain Moses' memory, not as a hero of faith, but as a weakness to be exploited. So the dispute wasn't really about a body. It was about influence, about challenging God's purpose for humanity. What does this teach us? Spiritual warfare isn't some distant, abstract idea reserved for end-time prophecies. It's present in our everyday lives. As we see in the battle over Moses, many spiritual conflicts take place silently, behind the scenes, far from human eyes. That's why we're called to stay alert, to discern what may be hidden beneath the surface of ordinary circumstances. For centuries, believers and scholars have wondered, what was really at stake beyond Moses' body? Maybe the answer is this. Every divine action, even the unseen ones, carries a greater purpose. When Michael stepped in, he wasn't just guarding a body. He was protecting the continuation of God's plan for Israel. At stake was the integrity of the story of salvation and the preservation of Moses' spiritual legacy for generations to come. But this battle wasn't just between angels and demons. Lucifer and his allies, with their ancient cunning, tried to deceive Michael. Their goal was to create confusion and chaos. If they had succeeded in twisting that moment, they could have distorted the entire spiritual narrative of God's people. What many see as a forgotten detail is, in truth, a key event that reveals the depth of the struggle between light and darkness. Every move in that hidden battle teaches us about evil's relentless attempts to twist what God has designed. And that brings us to an essential question. How many invisible battles are happening around us right now? How often does the enemy try to pull us away from our purpose, just as he tried to distort the legacy of Moses? Just like Michael protected what was sacred, we're called to do the same, to keep our faith strong and our commitment to God steady, even when darkness tries to confuse or distract us. So who stands out as the true hero? It's not Moses, although his role was powerful, but Michael, the archangel, who, with unwavering loyalty and strength, made sure God's will was carried out. Yet even this victory was just the beginning. The battle between heaven's armies and the forces of darkness was far from over. Michael the archangel is one of the most powerful and mysterious figures in all of Scripture. His mission to protect the body of Moses was no ordinary angelic task. It was a sacred responsibility that involved far more than simply guarding human remains. Contrary to what many might think, this mission went far beyond the physical realm. Michael was entrusted with ensuring that Moses, the deliverer of the Hebrew people, would not be defiled in any way. The Bible mentions this event briefly, but the magnitude of Michael's role reaches far beyond what we can imagine. It's important to understand that Michael didn't act on his own. He was under direct command from God, carrying out a key part of a plan that, although hidden from human eyes, carried eternal consequences. Guarding the body of Moses wasn't just about physical integrity. It was about preserving the purity of God's redemptive plan. Moses stood for faithfulness, spiritual leadership, and covenant. Even after death, his body symbolized the continuity of that promise. By protecting it, Michael upheld the sacred link between God and his people. Michael's mission teaches us a lot. In our daily lives, we face challenges that test our faith and trust in God's purposes. Just like him, we are called to stand watch and protect what's sacred in our lives, our faith, our values, and above all, our relationship with God. The battle Michael fought to preserve Moses' legacy mirrors the quiet struggles we face, battles over what the Lord has entrusted to us. And to overcome them, we need spiritual alertness, discernment, and unwavering strength. This mission also reveals a powerful truth about spiritual authority. Michael was chosen not because he was the most feared, but because he was fully surrendered to God's will. His authority came from humility and obedience, not brute force. That shows us something profound. When we stop trying to control everything and instead serve with humility, we become true vessels of heaven's authority. Real strength lies in submission to divine purpose, and that kind of strength transforms everything. Michael also stands as the ultimate spiritual warrior, one who fights not for pride, but for justice. He didn't hesitate, even when facing the most cunning of enemies. In the same way, we're called to fight spiritual battles with faith, prayer, and endurance. When we align ourselves with God's will, it doesn't matter how fierce the battle is. Victory is certain because it's God who stands behind us. Reflecting on Michael's mission reminds us that divine protection is much closer than we often realize. Each of us is called to guard what God has placed in our hands. Whether it's our families, our relationships, or our spiritual responsibilities, we're meant to act with care and purpose, just like Michael did. To protect what is sacred is a mark of spiritual maturity and true loyalty to the Lord. And this mission reveals something else that can't be ignored. Spiritual warfare is real. Michael wasn't just protecting Moses, he was preserving the very continuity of God's plan for humanity. He was a guardian, and now that role echoes as a calling for us, to be guardians in our own journeys, alert and steadfast against the darkness that tries to surround us. Michael's story is just one chapter in an eternal plan, but it leads us directly into the next decisive moment, the one where Lucifer's fury erupts in the face of God's unshakable protection. What happens when he realizes he can't touch what's been sealed by the Most High? The battle between light and darkness is about to rise to a whole new level. Lucifer, the fallen angel, has always been driven by deep resentment. His fall from heaven, the result of trying to challenge the authority of the Most High, left scars that never truly healed. But his fury burned even brighter when he learned that the remains of Moses, Israel's great deliverer, were under divine protection. This bitterness wasn't just about revenge, it was a calculated strategy to regain control. If he couldn't rule over humanity directly, then he would try to claim what most inspired them. And Moses, with his sacred mission, was exactly that symbol. Lucifer's attempt to take possession of Moses' body wasn't about anything material. It was symbolic, deceptive, and spiritually corrupt. Moses wasn't just a servant of God, he was a mediator, a leader, and a living witness of God's covenant with Israel. His body carried spiritual weight, a legacy of faith. And Lucifer, in his arrogance, sought to defile that. More than seeking power, he wanted to challenge divine sovereignty, to prove that even in exile he could still interfere with God's eternal plans. This kind of bitterness isn't just a distant concept. We see it mirrored in many moments of human life. We all face situations where anger, jealousy, or resentment threaten to take control. Lucifer's story shows us that feeding those emotions is destructive, not just for those around us, but especially for the one who carries them. His rage, born from the desire to be like God, ended in an obsession with a corpse, a painful metaphor for how pride blinds and destroys. The lesson is clear. Resentment imprisons us and pulls us away from the path of peace. It's also important to see that this wasn't an isolated event. It was part of an ongoing rebellion. Even after his fall, Lucifer never stopped his campaign against God's order. This shows us how evil often works, persistent and quiet, constantly trying to twist what is right. And often this is exactly how it moves in our lives, planting resentment, testing our patience, provoking rash reactions. When we give room to those emotions, we slowly drift from God's purpose. That's why true vigilance begins in the soul. By trying to corrupt the sacred symbol that Moses represented, Lucifer aimed to destroy the hope of the people. He wanted to turn a great leader into a symbol of defeat. If he could stain that legacy, he would spread confusion and discouragement throughout Israel. But Michael, steady and obedient, stood guard to make sure that didn't happen. He knew that if the enemy succeeded, the consequences would be devastating. This moment reminds us that in times of great crisis, when darkness tries to overtake us, we need strength, faith, and obedience. Lucifer's fury also speaks to our own temptations to control and manipulate. Often, we act from a place of insecurity disguised as strength, but when we refuse to accept divine authority and insist on doing everything ourselves, we become vulnerable to pride and eventually to downfall. Lucifer's example calls us to humility. Recognizing our limits and trusting God's guidance is the cure for the illusion of control. In the end, Lucifer's attempt ended in failure. As with every assault he launches against the kingdom, he was defeated. But his actions serve as a warning. Darkness doesn't rest. It keeps trying to spread anger, doubt, and division. Still, with God's strength and the faithfulness of those like Michael, we can stand firm. And this is where the story intensifies, because even though Lucifer failed, he didn't back down, and the battle between light and darkness was just beginning. Mount Nebo, a place of deep spiritual significance, became the setting for a heavenly battle that remained hidden from human eyes for centuries. It was there that Michael and Lucifer faced each other in an epic confrontation, filled with spiritual tension and divine authority. Many overlook that this was not a physical fight, but a supernatural clash between light and darkness. On one side stood Michael, the archangel faithful to God's eternal purpose. On the other, Lucifer, the fallen angel consumed by fury and a desperate desire to subvert God's authority. That mountain wasn't just a beautiful landscape or a place of farewell. It was the final place Moses, the prophet who led Israel, ever stood, the point where he was called into eternal rest. For Lucifer, it represented far more than geography. It was a strategic location. If he could defile the mountain, if he could corrupt what had been consecrated by the Most High, he would claim a symbolic victory powerful enough to shake the foundations of the divine plan. The battle wasn't merely over Moses' body, it was over dominion of sacred ground. land set apart by God. Michael, however, was not caught off guard. He came prepared, not because of personal strength, but because he stood fully submitted to God's will. He didn't act out of rage or a thirst for revenge, but with clear purpose and unshakable resolve. That alone gave him an undeniable advantage. While Lucifer was driven by pride and resentment, Michael remained grounded in humility and obedience. This battle was more than a clash between angels and demons. It was a spiritual portrait of the struggle between heavenly humility and rebellious arrogance. This moment on Mount Nebo mirrors the spiritual battles we face in our own lives. How often do we encounter dilemmas, temptations, and pressures that try to pull us away from God's purpose? The challenges we face don't always come with a face. They often come in subtle forms. And like Michael, we're called to fight, not with human strength, but with the authority that comes from walking closely with God. When we're aligned with heaven, no battle is too great, even when it feels exhausting. It's crucial to understand that Michael's victory wasn't marked by violence, but by authority. He didn't need to raise a sword or show aggression. His presence alone, and the recognition of the mission he had received, was enough. That teaches us something powerful. When spiritual authority is genuine, it stands on its own. It gives us the strength to face storms with courage and calm, without panic, without hesitation. As we reflect on what happened at Mount Nebo, we see that the true victory wasn't just driving Lucifer away, it was preserving God's plan intact. That spiritual battle wasn't only about the moment at hand, it was about the future of a nation, the legacy of a prophet, and the continuation of a divine promise. Through his unwavering faithfulness, Michael ensured that nothing would contaminate what God had established. This episode also challenges us to consider our own internal battles. It's easy to feel isolated, like we're the only ones facing unseen forces. But just like Michael, we have access to the strength that comes through faith, humility, and obedience. These are the pillars that uphold the victorious, not loudness or spectacle, but the quiet firmness of those who trust God's lead. The battle that took place on that mountain was more than a conflict. It was a spiritual turning point. It represented protection, vigilance, and loyalty. Michael defended Moses, yes, but he also defended what would come after. And even with that victory, the war was far from over. Lucifer, unwilling to accept defeat, continued to scheme. The conflict between the forces of heaven and the powers of darkness was far from reaching its final chapter. Lucifer's cunning is something that deserves deep reflection. He wasn't just a being of immense power. He possessed a demonic intelligence, able to mask his essence and manipulate others with the appearance of truth. After failing in his attempt to claim Moses' body, Lucifer, wounded in his pride, chose a more subtle approach. He presented himself as an angel of light. His goal was to deceive Michael, the archangel of faithfulness, and compromise the divine mission. Disguised as a celestial being, he aimed to create confusion and lure Michael into error, which could have changed the course of the spiritual battle. This move was cold, calculated, and strategic. Lucifer knew he couldn't defeat Michael through force, but he noticed something he thought he could exploit: the archangel's humility, his complete submission to God's will. Appearing in light, Lucifer tried to pose as an ally of the very kingdom he opposed. But even with all his disguise, he couldn't breach the authority that surrounded Michael, who quickly discerned the lie. Lucifer's intelligence, no matter how refined, could not outmatch the spiritual discernment of someone who walks in obedience. This episode teaches us powerful truths. Evil doesn't always appear as obvious chaos. It dresses itself in promises, in charisma, in attractive words. In our lives, we face situations that at first glance seem good, fair, or desirable, but on closer inspection, reveal themselves as well-crafted traps. Lucifer may no longer appear in visible form, but his logic remains: seduction through appearances of good. Whether through subtle temptations, captivating ideologies, or too good to be true opportunities, he still seeks to derail divine purposes with convincing disguises. That's why, like Michael, we must develop discernment. The archangel's strength didn't come from physical power, but from unbreakable communion with God. He wasn't guided by appearances, but by truth revealed by the Spirit. True discernment doesn't come from human experience. It flows from spiritual sensitivity. When we nurture a living connection with God, we can see past superficial shine and recognize the deceptions trying to surround us. This moment also highlights the need for vigilance. Even after being cast out of heaven, Lucifer still acts with subtlety, trying to undermine the faith of God's children. Just as Michael held his ground, even in the face of a well-crafted illusion, we too are called to stand firm, trusting not in our own perceptions but in divine direction. Michael knew his mission was non-negotiable. That's why, even when confronted with a convincing lie, he remained unshaken. The lesson isn't just about resisting temptation, it's about trusting exclusively in the truth that comes from God. When our foundation is the Word, deception becomes clear. This calls us to cultivate a discerning and watchful faith, one that isn't easily impressed, that questions what appears good and seeks what is truly genuine. Lucifer's disguise reflects many of the spiritual challenges we face today. Not everything that shines comes from light. The battle between Michael and Lucifer was more than a clash of strength. It was a test of integrity and spiritual perception. Despite all his deceit, Lucifer failed. But his defeat didn't mark the end of the war. Michael overcame that deception, once again confirming the supremacy of light over darkness. Yet the victory was partial. Many chapters of this unseen war remained to unfold, and Michael knew the spiritual battle was far from over. Michael didn't need to shout. He didn't raise a sword. His strength lay in the quiet confidence of someone who knows the source of his authority. And notice this, true authority doesn't need to prove itself. It's felt simply through presence. Before Satan, Michael didn't argue or throw fiery accusations. He simply said, "The Lord rebuke you." That short response carries a power that dismantles pride. It's like a father who doesn't need to raise his voice to be respected. What Michael teaches us here is that spiritual authority doesn't come from pride and it flows from submission. He understood that power and glory didn't come from him, but from God. Today, many confuse authority with performance. They want a stage, they want applause. But Michael, an archangel, shows us that true greatness lies in placing ourselves under God's will. It's when we understand that the battle isn't ours, it belongs to the Lord. Some people, when confronted, react with anger, trying to assert strength through shouting or bold posts on social media. But have you noticed how wise silence often earns more respect than 1,000 words? Michael shows us that humility is a powerful shield. So how do we apply this? It's simple. The next time you're wrongly attacked, instead of lashing out, whisper in your heart, "The Lord is my defender," and keep walking in peace. It's striking to see that even a celestial being like Michael refuses to cross the boundaries set by God. He doesn't play by the enemy's rules. How many times, in personal conflict, do we fall into the trap of trying to win by force or manipulation? Michael calls us to a higher posture, one that doesn't stoop to darkness but shines with light. And that light comes from knowing that God, not our ego, is in control. Here's a practical example. Imagine a workplace where you're being treated unfairly. Instead of retaliating or gossiping, you stay upright, trusting that a higher authority is watching over everything. That, my friend, is walking like Michael. He doesn't rely on position, title, or clever arguments. He relies on God's character, and that makes him unshakable. Michael's authority isn't centered on himself. It's about the God he serves, and that's the key that changes everything. In a world where everyone wants to seem like the strongest, Michael teaches that the truly strong are those who know how to bow to the Father's will. As the saying goes, heaven moves for those who kneel. Humility, in this sense, isn't weakness, it's spiritual structure. And if we reflect a little deeper, the very name Michael means who is like God. It's not a declaration, it's a rhetorical question. A reminder that no one compares to the Most High. And when we carry that awareness, we stop competing, we stop comparing. We start trusting that the authority guiding us is the same one holding the universe together. And it's exactly that trust that prepares us for something even more profound, the secret burial of Moses. Because when we begin to understand Michael's authority, we also begin to see why certain mysteries are hidden. not out of fear, but to protect what is sacred. The body of Moses was not left to chance. His departure from this world carries a divine secret, wrapped in layers of protection that only heavenly authority can preserve. Picture an invisible vault, sealed to ensure that nothing sacred will be violated. This hidden place isn't just a geographic location, it's a spiritual dimension, a space guarded by forces the human mind cannot begin to comprehend. Even today, some mysteries remain beyond the reach of curious eyes. This secret burial teaches us the importance of preserving what is sacred. In life, we often feel the urge to share everything, to explain, show, and prove ourselves. But Michael reminds us that some treasures are meant to be protected with care. A practical example, think of your most precious ideas or the plans you're still forming. Not everything should be shared. Some secrets are part of your covenant with God, just as it was between Moses and the Creator. There's also a lesson here about complete trust. By accepting this invisible protection, Moses shows us that we don't need human witnesses to validate what we do before God. Projects, decisions, callings, they don't always need the world's approval. Sometimes the divine seal on what we're building is enough to guarantee that the purpose will be fulfilled at the right time. The secret place where Moses rests also symbolizes parts of life that must be kept safe from outside influence. Just as Michael guarded what was holy, we too can protect our values, our faith, and our deepest relationships from contamination. Setting boundaries is often a spiritual act of wisdom. Not everything needs to be debated, not everything needs to be exposed. There's something fascinating about the very mystery of Moses' burial. It creates reverence. The fact that we don't know the exact location elevates the value of what was kept hidden. In everyday life, this translates into practicing discretion with personal processes, inner decisions, or future goals. Those who reveal everything all the time may lose their sense of sacredness, but those who preserve their integrity naturally inspire trust and respect. Divine protection doesn't act with rigidity, it works with purpose. Each seal, each layer of hiddenness serves a specific role to prevent any corrupting force from derailing the plan. This leads us to a reflection. How are we organizing our inner life? Are we building solid principles, setting clear boundaries? Michael stands as a guardian, and we, as disciples, are called to cultivate that same discipline. When we look at this secret burial, we also realize that some plans are only revealed at the right time. Moses trusted that the story would unfold, even without knowing when or how. That encourages us to practice patience and faith in our own processes, our dreams, our projects, our relationships. Not everything needs to happen right away, and not everything must be understood right now. This final mystery gently leads us to a deeper reflection on humility and surrender. For something so sacred to be guarded, there must be recognition of a higher authority. And that's exactly what Michael teaches us, that humility before divine power is the key to protecting what truly matters. Humility isn't weakness, it's power in silence. Michael shows us that submitting to divine authority doesn't make us smaller. On the contrary, it expands our capacity to act with wisdom. Picture a warrior who fights without ego. Every move is intentional, with no energy wasted on pride or vanity. In everyday life, this means listening more than speaking, thinking before reacting, and above all, recognizing that there's a greater plan guiding every step we take. True strength, as Michael reveals, isn't about controlling others, it's about mastering yourself. Controlling our thoughts, words, and actions is often more difficult than any external battle. For instance, when we're provoked, whether at work or within our families, reacting impulsively is easy, but not always wise. In those moments, humility means taking a deep breath, thinking things through and acting with intention, trusting that God's justice will always prevail. This humility also appears in our willingness to learn. Michael, though an archangel, follows higher commands with complete trust. This teaches us to value counsel, instruction, and correction, whether from mentors, teachers, or spiritual leaders. In practice, it means listening carefully, reflecting on what we hear and applying it with discernment, a reflection of heavenly wisdom. Another essential aspect is humility in success. It's tempting to take pride in our achievements, but Michael reminds us that every victory comes through a higher authority. Recognizing that our talents are gifts and that every opportunity fits into a divine purpose helps keep us balanced and free from arrogance. A practical example: when finishing a project or resolving a conflict, giving thanks to God instead of seeking credit keeps us grounded in spiritual reality. Humility also protects us from error. Those who act with pride often stumble because they ignore warnings and wise counsel. Michael teaches that submitting to divine authority brings clarity. It prevents rushed decisions and helps us stay centered. In everyday terms, it means seeking advice from wise people, taking time to think before acting, and carefully weighing risks, all of which guard us from avoidable failure. There is also a form of humility that doesn't seek recognition, the quiet kind. Michael acts with resolve, completes his mission, and lets God handle the outcome. That inspires us to live with purpose, even when no one applauds. Small actions, like helping someone in secret or giving without expecting anything in return, reflect this quiet yet powerful strength. In times of conflict, Michael shows us that a humble, steady, and respectful posture is far more effective than aggression. Whether in negotiations, relationships, or debates, patience and integrity often bring better results than force. Light persuades more than shouting ever could. Ultimately, this lesson in humility prepares us to recognize true victory, not one that depends on personal strength, but one born from submission to divine authority. That's how Michael triumphs, not by being the greatest, but by understanding that no one compares to God. And it's this very awareness that prepares us for what comes next, the final manifestation of victory, when divine authority triumphs once and for all over the darkness. Michael's victory isn't rooted in physical strength, but in the deep conviction that divine authority always prevails. He doesn't fight out of hatred or revenge because his victory is already sealed by the order of the Creator. It's like planting a seed with full confidence that, in the right time, it will grow. Michael teaches us that trusting in God is the key to overcoming even the most intimidating obstacles. The forces of darkness act deceptively, always seeking subtle ways to lead us astray. Yet Michael proves that when we walk in alignment with God's will, no scheme of evil can stop his purpose. And that's a practical lesson. Resisting temptation, making ethical choices, and holding on to integrity are quiet, yet powerful, ways to win the invisible battles that threaten our inner peace. Another striking aspect is Michael's strategy. He doesn't act on impulse or rush ahead. Every move he makes is steady, intentional, and grounded in the authority he represents. That inspires us to plan wisely, assess risks carefully, and act with clarity. Whether in our work, relationships, or life decisions, this posture leads to lasting victories, not just temporary wins. Michael's victory also represents the defense of principles and values. He protects what is just and sacred, not out of pride, but out of love for the truth. In our own journey, this means staying faithful to our convictions, even when the easier path seems more attractive. Choosing what's right under pressure is a way of mirroring that same heavenly triumph here on earth. And there's something powerful in that process. Michael's victory inspires those around him. When someone stands with strength, righteousness, and spirituality, it brings confidence to others. People are strengthened, reassured, and encouraged to walk the same path. Leading by example, acting with integrity, and protecting the vulnerable is a way of carrying that same authority, one that doesn't shout, but quietly transforms hearts. It's important to note, Michael doesn't destroy the enemy out of anger, but out of obedience to God's will. His victory establishes boundaries, not gratuitous violence, and that teaches us something vital. We can face great conflicts with wisdom and balance. Resolving disputes with patience, ethics, and dialogue is how we apply on a human level the same divine wisdom that guided Michael. And it's this certainty in God's prevailing authority that sustains us. Even in times of crisis, loss, or injustice, we can remain firm, knowing that a higher authority ensures the triumph of good. That transforms how we view our struggles, making us more resilient, more patient, and deeply connected to eternal purpose. Michael's victory leads us naturally to personal reflection, on our faith, our calling, and the invitation of Jesus Christ. Because it's when we accept His authority that we begin to experience, in our own lives, the very same strength that overcomes darkness. Accepting Jesus Christ is not just a spiritual decision, it's an invitation to experience a kind of authority and protection that goes beyond human logic. When we open our hearts, we realize we're no longer alone in life's battles. It's like receiving an invisible shield, one that not only protects but also strengthens. Michael showed us that this strength doesn't come from within ourselves, but from the one who rules the universe. And embracing this reality transforms every challenge into an opportunity to grow. The call to faith is also a call to complete trust. It's not just about believing, it's about surrendering every part of our lives to divine guidance. Imagine being on a boat in the middle of a storm and knowing the captain is flawless. That's what faith in Jesus feels like, security, even when the winds are against you. In practical terms, it means praying with honesty, meditating on the Word, and learning to see a greater purpose behind every situation. Faith also frees us from the anxieties that weigh us down. So often we fight battles against worries that feel overwhelming, but from God's perspective, they're small. Accepting Jesus as Savior is recognizing that we are not the ultimate authority over our lives, and that there is a higher care constantly working in our favor. A simple example: before making big decisions, pausing to pray and seek discernment can prevent mistakes and bring clarity we didn't expect. And faith isn't just for the hard days. It sustains us through the ordinary. It's a lifestyle, a daily journey of connection, gratitude, and obedience. Just as Michael stood firm in God's authority, we can develop habits that keep us aligned with that strength. Reading scripture, taking time for reflection, and walking with people who build us up. These practices prepare us to live out our faith consistently. Faith also empowers us against negative influences. This isn't about superstition or magic. It's about real spiritual alignment that prevents darkness from taking hold. Michael shows us that divine protection is effective. And practically, this reveals itself in ethical choices, emotional self-control, and stability when provoked. Decisions that keep us firmly rooted in what is good. And more than that, faith transforms us from the inside out. Those who accept Jesus begin to see the world differently. They find purpose where there was only pain, and learn to forgive where there once was bitterness. That transformation directly shapes our relationships. In moments of conflict, for example, faith gives us wisdom to respond peacefully, avoiding unnecessary arguments and building bridges instead of walls. Finally, there is a joy that flows from this journey. Michael teaches us that victory over evil isn't just a beautiful idea, it's a lived reality. A sense of safety, hope, and purpose. Every battle overcome in faith becomes a testimony of resilience. Every fear faced becomes a lesson. And even when storms return, we feel that an invisible presence holds us and leads us forward. Accepting Jesus Christ is the beginning of a deep and life-changing journey. It's being connected to the same authority that protected Moses and secured Michael's victory. And as we walk in that faith, we begin to see that no step is wasted. Every moment is guided, every pain has meaning, and every victory, whether quiet or glorious, reveals God's eternal care over our lives. The story of Michael and the burial of Moses reveals something profound. There is a higher authority, divine protection, and a heavenly strategy, and they're not reserved only for heaven. They can and should be mirrored in our journey here on earth. But the real question is, will you just observe, or will you apply these principles every day? Have you ever considered how humility, faith, and real trust in God's protection could transform the way you face conflict, make decisions, or handle life's pressures? These virtues aren't abstract. They're practical tools for anyone who wants to live with balance, strength, and purpose. And what if I told you that this same authority can be lived out in your daily routine? Yes, every ethical decision, every choice backed by faith, every moment when you choose patience over impulse is a direct reflection of the strength Michael demonstrated. The question is, are you ready to take a stand, to protect what truly matters and live with intention? Also think about the impact your posture can have. Just as Michael inspired reverence without raising his voice, you can influence co-workers, family, and friends simply by living in alignment with truth and faith. So what can you start doing today to reflect that light? In what area of your life can you act with more conviction and integrity? Here's a real practical challenge. Start small. Maybe it's finally making that difficult decision you've been avoiding. Or maybe it's asking for forgiveness. Maybe it's simply returning to your faith routine, with more focus this time. What matters is taking the first step, because the more you practice, the more you'll discover that spiritual authority isn't theory. It's a lived reality, it's posture, it's fruit. And if you want to keep walking this path, learning how to apply these spiritual principles in everyday life, how to protect your dreams, and how to walk by faith even in the middle of chaos, then subscribe to the channel right now. Turn on notifications. We're building a space of truth, transformation, and victory together. Now the final question: will you just watch, or will you act and start transforming your life today?